Okay, so I know I said that on essay 2 you don't have to do any source documentation, like you don't have to cite outside sources, but I did say that if you do try to cite anything, stop. There we go. But if you do try to cite something like statistics, from an outside source for this essay, you do still have to try to cite that with MLA, which I'm going to be teaching. So that's what today is. I'm going to be showing you MLA, which will be used on essay 3 and on the research paper. So that's the goal of what I'm doing, is that you'll still get the MLA instruction. If you decide to go ahead and use it on essay 2, you can. You don't have to. That does mean I had some people in the other class, they started looking up stuff. It was on the essay 2 assignment sheet that says if you do try to use outside information for this paper, you have to try to cite it, but I guess they didn't see that part. They were like, oh crap, I tried to use like 7 things, and I was like, well, just essentially do your best. So if you're trying to cite something, I want you to do your best based on what we see here, and you won't be really fully graded on the intricacies of MLA until essay 3 in the research paper and annotated bibliography. So that's the goal today. I've already graded all of your essays, I believe. I don't know why I mention that every day, but generally speaking, this time of the year, I'm always talking about where I'm at in the grading process. And with yours, I'm done. So I guess maybe I'm just bragging every day how I'm still done with them. Makes me feel good. Let me see. Do you have any questions about stuff, things? I'll probably still address some questions that came up in the other class as well after you have yours. No questions yet? If you come up with some, ask me, especially about this MLA stuff. It can be kind of complicated. Let me see. Some people ask about the labs, which I think y'all have asked about it before, but I want to cover that again. People are like, what about those labs? What are they? They're just on the side of Blackboard. On the left-hand side, it says English 1301 labs. And you just need to, yes?
When do we have to finish the labs? Is there a specific date that we need to have done by?
Week 13, day 2.
Okay.
And there's no individual dates for all of them, but you have to get them all done by week 13, day 2. The only thing you have to do to get the grades is the quiz at the end of each one that says quiz and then in parentheses graded. The practice quiz, it'll give you a grade, but it doesn't factor into any of your grades at all. So you don't have to worry about that. And I've told you how to get 100% on the labs, like the best way to make that happen. So just make sure you get them all done. That'll better your chances. What was the other? Yes?
Will we get to revise our research paper?
Oh yeah, definitely. You can revise all the papers. The only paper you can't revise, there is no other paper you can't revise. You can revise all of them. No. The final exam essay, if you end up having to take it, can't revise that one. Because there's just no time. And likely I'll have a baby in my lap at that time anyway, so I'm already going to be irritated at the ones I have to grade. Why didn't you get an 80 on all your essays? What did you do wrong? Seriously. By the way, if you somebody asked me today, how can we calculate your grades? I just want to go ahead and mention, if I haven't already, that the average you see in that weird average column on Blackboard, that's not accurate. This semester we have 2 grading conferences, one on week 9, day 1, and we have one on week 14, day 2, I think. So it's right after we come back from spring break, after we've turned in all 3 essays, and also right after the research paper has been turned in. So basically your vast majority of your grades this whole semester will be covered by that point. And so I do grade conference after your first 3 essays, and then grade conference after your last 2, because annotated bibliography is kind of an essay, or sort of an essay. Now, I can teach you real quick how to calculate, basically how you calculate your grade. If you look, the vast majority of your grade is essays. All you have to do really is to calculate based on the syllabus, where it says that grading policy section, it says this is 5%, this is 10%. And if you look, each one of the essays 1, 2, and 3. And that's just, I'm not going to keep writing that. Essay 1, 2, 3, And then there's the research paper. SA1 is 10%, SA2 is 10%, SA3 is 10%, and the research paper is 30%. So it's basically worth all three of those together. So if you want to know what you're making at any given time, I mean, it's essentially the same calculation you're going to do if you're trying to figure out if you're exempt from the final exam. Because to me, the essays will tell you basically if your grades are in a good spot. The only difference would be if you haven't come to any of the peer reviews, that's going to affect your grade in a negative way. So I mean, that would not be great. Blessing twice, I think. And then so let's say that we have, by the way, I feel really, you can tell me if I've gone too fast when I do this. We'll just do it first. Let's say that you have like a, I don't know, like a 74 on SA1. You've got like an 89 on SA2. And then on SA, I don't like odd numbers. I want to do even number. No, it's fine. I should do it this way. And then on SA3, you've got like an 86, right? So let's see. 4 plus 9 is 13, plus 6 is 19. Carry the 1, 8 plus, times 3 is 24. So 249 is the total score, and to get the average, you know, you divide by how many there are. So I need to divide by 3. 18, 60, 69 divided by 3 is what, 23?
83.
83. There we go. So 83 is the average of all of these. I'm sorry, it doesn't look very good. So 83 is the average of these three numbers. Now later when the research paper comes out, so maybe you would know, okay, right now in class I'm making a 74 after SA1. After SA2 you'll say, okay, well I'm making these divided by 2 right now, where that means I'm making 70, what's the difference here? 15, so 7.5 plus this, so 81.5, I guess, is that right? Is that the difference between those two? The middle? 81.5, is that right? Apparently I'm asking the wrong people to check me. I'm pretty sure that's right. So if it's not, no, it might be 82.5. No, it's 81.5 because 7.5, 8 plus 1.5 is 9. So, and then at this point I'm like, okay, well now I'm making 83 because I didn't do quite so well on that. But it helped boost my grade up a little bit still because it's still higher than that 74. And then like later when I get my research paper, let's say I did really good on that joker because I had all my sources in place just like I was supposed to. Because these are all worth 30% and this one's worth 30%, now I just have to divide by 2 because both of these grades are equal. So the difference between them is 11, so it's going to be 5.5 apiece. So I just need to add 5.5 to this, and then I get 88.5 as my average, which means I'm exempt from the final exam, but I might want to do some extra things to make sure I get an A. Though, with the daily grades that I have for you called the connection grades, which are basically grades for showing up. The presentation grade, which is like the easiest presentation grade ever, later in the class, that's factored into your, it's 5% as well. The annotated bibliography is fairly easy. It does get calculated into this because it's only 5%, it tends not to have a huge effect on this number. I mean, it can knock off almost 10 points if you don't do it, but I mean, as long as you make roughly the same grade, it's not going to have it's going to have a marginal effect. Shoot, what would the effect be? Let's say that you made a really bad like annotated bibliography, you got a 70 on it. It's worth 5%. So this is a weird number because you're having to basically, you had an 88.5 based on 0.6. Let's do that. 88.5 times 0.6 equals what? 0, carry the 3. 8 times 6 is 48 plus 3 is 1. Carry the 5. 5 plus 8 is 13. No, 8 times 3 is 24. I think I did this wrong.
53.1.
Wait, where does 3 come from? What is that? I need to do this differently. I can't think like that. I can't think sideways. right? 5 times 6 is 30, carry the 3, 8 times 6 is 48, plus 3 is 51, carry the 5, 48 plus 5 is 53. 531.0. This one gets calculated based on 0.05. So you divide this by 20, so it's going to be 3.5. Yeah, but that's its final average. So I had what, 35 points to this? 1 plus 5 is 6, 3 plus 3 is 6, 5. That's divided by 0.65. Is that right? Hey Siri, what is 566 divided by 0.65? No, it's going to be a larger number.
566 divided by 0.65 is about 870.7692.
But does that mean you have an 87? I don't think that that's what that means.
We did somewhere something went wrong, because...
Here, I can do this real easy. Let me see. Now, here's the number I came up with, was 87.0. Let's see if this was right or not. Because I can do it the real way where I actually calculate it all out, so I can find that out very simply. Uh, 7.4 plus 8.9 plus 8.6 plus 9.4 times 3. Hey Siri, what is 9.4 times 3? It's 28.2. Hey Siri, what is 94 times 3?
94 times 3
28.2.
is 282.
Good. So then I add, what is this, 0.5 times 70? So that actually is 3.5, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hey Siri, what is 7.4 plus 8.9 plus 8.6 plus 28.2 plus 3.5?
7.4 plus 8.9 plus 8.6 plus 28.2 plus 3.5 is 56.6.
What is 56.6 divided by 0.65? Oh. What is 56.6 divided by 0.65?
That would be about 87.0769.
Okay, so it was correct. It was just a weird way of thinking about it. It was so much easier than this. Well, I don't know. But you could do the same, which is probably going to be a lot easier when you use a calculator than trying to do it by head like I did for the most part. But you essentially just give the things their proper weights and then do the division properly. It's so hard for me to tell people how to properly do like grade calculations, because for me it's really easy, because math was actually my best subject in school, not English. Did I ever mention that before? Yeah. So math, science, I breezed through those jokers in a way that it was somewhat boring doing math calculations, because they all make sense to me. English is more fun because I'm like, why shouldn't I curse in this paper? What's the reason behind that? Because this person doesn't like cursing. Why does that matter? Because they'll hate you if you use cursing in a paper. You know, it's like all those little like eccentricities of how we relate to humans. Whereas math is like, oh, this works because it always does. You know, that's not as interesting to me. But you essentially just calculate based on 10%, 10%, 10%, 30%, and 5% for the annotated. And you can see it had a marginal effect. Even a not great grade only brought it down like 1.5 points. So it's not a huge effect that it has on that grade, especially if you're making relatively the same as what you have been. You can also see your best bet of raising your grades when you revise a research paper if it's low. Second most these, third most that. So that's kind of where to concentrate your revisions. So do not pay attention to the column on the grade book that says this is what you're making right now. It's not. It's my best approximation, but it's a running total. Or it's not a running total, so because I had a lot of people who just stopped writing essays because it told them they were making a 90. And they're like, oh, I just won't write anything else because I'm always making a 90. But you know, you can't just turn in one essay and have that be a 90 in the class. So that one student who complained, we were like, well, duh. And he was like, but I thought it just meant only had... It was weird. Weird day for me. So I'm just going to tell you straight up, Grade conference, really the only way to truly know your grade or calculate yourself. And you'll know everything except the connection grades and other little hidden grades that I tell you when the grade conferences come. But this is the best way to estimate, I think, is just calculate your essay average. Let's see, there are more questions about this stuff or any other stuff. This is another reason why I don't teach math. Like, I'm good at math, but I can never teach it because I don't understand why this wouldn't make sense. And that would make a terrible teacher. You ever had one of those teachers who just got math and they would try to teach it to you and you're like, I don't understand. They're like, why? That's why I don't think people who are really, 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 really good at math but don't understand why it works, just that it works, should never teach it. I should never teach math.
I think it's because your organization sucks. It's like all over the place.
But I mean, it makes sense in my head. Like I see this all separated by shapes. Like my brain is separating this here, 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 and here, as well as here. Well, minus this. But the numbers are really all I'm looking at. So like my brain sees it that way, even if it's not like that in reality. So I can't even see lack of organization when it comes to math, which sucks. I could never teach that subject. Let's move on to MLA. Yeah, let's move on to MLA. So I'm talking about MLA, but like, what does this abbreviation even mean? It's actually abbreviates to, it's an abbreviation of the Modern Language Association. And remember, I'm talking about all of this because you can use MLA to cite research for this paper on Essay 2, but you don't have to. Only on Essay 3, the annotated bibliography and the research paper, do you have to cite research. That's the only time you're required to. This one you can, and I'm not going to be as hard grading it. And if you get something wrong, I'm not going to really count that against you on this one. I'm just going to like tell you, if you're doing it roughly the correct way, without counting off if you aren't. So there's no risk on this assignment. But it stands for the Modern Language Association of America, and basically their goal is, for over 100 years, members have worked to strengthen the study and teaching of language and literature. So when I say MLA, that's what I'm talking about, Modern Language Association. Study of language and literature is what they're trying to strengthen. But now how does that apply to us? Because I throw that word around a lot. What these two paragraphs say, this is a direct quote from the, I believe it's the, because that's what it says, MLA Handbook for Writers of Research Paper, 8th edition. It says essentially here that academic writing is a conversation among scholars, so people do research from a number of different forms, and then they want to publish their work in such a way that other people who are also reading work can find information within their work. So they consider that to be kind of be a conversation where it's scholars talking to one another about, what information they found, and they want to make it available to the others. So the MLA format exists, and they've created this format for a way of allowing people to, in a set format that's common to everyone, present their research that can be easily understood. It's a very simple format compared to things like APA, the Chicago Manual of Style, which are very complicated. Basically, as I said, it's a format for writing that shows the reader in a simple fashion exactly from where the writer got his or her information. So if you were thinking you were going to cite some statistics for this paper, like your cause effect on like school shootings or something, you've got to cite those statistics and where you got them. You can't just include statistics without trying to cite them. If the reader want to follow the writer's trail of ideas, they can because the research exists. I'm sorry, I have to erase this. It's distracting me because numbers, I always look at them. I apologize. Okay. If the reader wants to follow the writer's trail of ideas back to their origins, they can. It's extremely useful both for making sure that writers actually do the research and for making that same research available to readers. So that's one of the reasons that we have MLA, so that you can show where you got your information, so you can basically verify you're not making it up. Now, when I say MLA, I know it said that it stood for Modern Language Association of America, and I keep saying we're going to be doing MLA. Like, what does that mean? We're going to be doing like that organization? Doesn't make any sense. I'm actually shortening the phrase MLA style, the style that these people have come up with for writing research papers. I'm shortening to just saying MLA. Because I think if I said MLA style over and over and over again constantly, it would become a little redundant. So rather than that, I just say MLA. You'll probably have something like that, too, like maybe at your work where there's some sort of abbreviation that you use all the time, which is an abbreviation for an organization, but not the actual thing. Is like, has anybody ever heard of OSHA? Like, I'm sure at your job, some of you have to worry about OSHA. Like you say, oh, that goes against OSHA, don't do that. And you're talking about the requirements that OSHA has set forth for the safety of people at their jobs. You're not talking about the actual organization, which stands for what? Organizational Safety and Health Association? Or occupational?
That's what it's
Occupational
Occupational.
safety and health administration.
Administration, right. But you're not talking about when you say, oh, we got to follow. I mean, you sort of talking about like make sure you, hold the ladder because OSHA. You're talking about like the rules they've set forth, not because of the organization itself. But you still abbreviate it in that way because the rules that come from these people, you still just use the name because it makes more sense. And it's not specific to say, don't make sure you follow the rules. Make sure you follow OSHA. Everybody knows what you're talking about. Now, the writer's reference is going to be very helpful in doing MLA. Bless you. More so, I think, even than the internet, because this right here has a tab from pages like 393 to almost the 450s, 470 actually. And this covers the basics and details of MLA. And if you're looking like, oh, I need to know how to cite a book, it's got it right here on this like index that it's got at the beginning of the section. And see, I've got all these boxes of like different things it'll tell you how to do. So you're like, oh, I need to cite a government document. That's over here. So there's all different types of things that can help you learn how to cite if you need to cite them. And that's all in this handy tab in this book. Now, if you're also in the sciences or you end up going into like nursing or something, you're likely going to have to do APA, which it also has that in this book. So rather than buy the giant APA manual, you could keep this book, which, by the way, you'll need this book also in English 1302 and in Brit Lit if you take me for that as well. So hold on to the book. Do they have like an option where if you've already just rented the book, you can go downstairs and just buy instead? Do they let you do that? Because that might be a good idea for this. If you rent it twice, it's going to cost more than if you just buy the daggum thing, I think. Right? I'm assuming the rental costs something like, let's assume we have a $100 book and the rental costs $75, the buy costs $100, but if you rent it 2 semesters in a row, that's $150 instead of $100, so you're actually losing money. Unless you ask my wife. Usually she's like, no, we go cheaper on this, it's easier. And I'm like, no, you pay more. You can go to Walmart, you can buy in bulk, but she'll go and buy like a little bag of dog treats. And I'm like, no, buy the big bag every time. It's like, we just need to make it to the end of the month. I'm like, yeah, no. We can make it even further. Buy the big bag. She won't do it. And so I like have to say, what do we buy at the store? Let me go. But then she's mad because I come up with like $100 worth of stuff, and she would have gone there for like $20. And I'm like, it'll last us for 3 months. He's like, we don't have to last 3 months. I'm like, well, we do. It's important. I love that one. So APA is here as well. It's a perfect purchase, I think, for anybody who's going to be having to write research papers at all in school. I'll be going through the MLA tab basically, so if you had it open, that'd be a good place to start. It starts with an index that tells you that it's 5 sections, I believe, are still supporting a thesis, which we're mostly familiar with because I've already covered that this semester. Citing sources and avoiding plagiarism. Which that's kind of new to you. Additionally, integrating sources, so not just how to cite them, but how to integrate them and make them work for you. Documenting sources, so that's where you're making sure that you have all the information for a source in place, so that everybody knows how to get back to that source. And MLA-5 concerns manuscript format and a sample paper. So that section I'm probably not going to go over, but it basically just gives you a sample paper within the tab that you can look at to see like how it formulated its research. It says I'm going to go through it slowly, but that's allowed to go through it fairly fast. So apologize. I'm going to skip through this section especially fast since we've already covered thesis in our PowerPoints and stuff. But what you need to do is form a working thesis, then organize your ideas, use sources to inform and support your argument. So this book covers in like, I think 2 paragraphs what it took me like the first 2 classes to come. But I think I did a better job than the book. So basically you have a claim you come up with that the rest of your writing will support. So you're going to make a claim about, like, which is your thesis. And the whole paper should be trying to persuade the reader or show the reader that that claim is true. Now the thesis may change as you do your research when you start doing research for things. But it's always important to know what claim you'll need to support during the writing process. Organizing your ideas once you have a thesis in place, you know what point you're going to try to prove. It's good to organize like how you're going to prove that point over the course of the essay, put those ideas in order. I noticed the other day that I had a student who was going over with me what they thought the best approach for the likely effects of a loss of clean water would be. And I noticed that when I looked at her outline, I noticed that a number of the effects that she had were sort of in reverse order. Like, I would say the first thing that happens is the immediate effects of like what happens immediately after water is gone. Like, how does that affect individuals? And then after that happens, then you start ramping it up to how does that affect, towns and like societies, the economy, that kind of stuff. And it kind of ramps up from there. But she was kind of going in reverse, saying, well, this is how it would affect the very far future. Now, this is how it would affect just before that, and just before that. But it kind of seems like the opposite way to approach it. So you have to have a nice way to organize those ideas and present them in a fashion that's going to be acceptable for the reader. Now, once you've got that stuff in place, you kind of need to use sources to inform and support your argument. So again, we don't have to do this for essay 2, but if you end up trying to use a statistic or something like that, or doing any kind of research, you will have to try to cite it using these formats. So this is stuff you've already done without sources before, providing background information or context, explain terms or concepts, supported claims. But something new, lending authority to your argument, will need to happen with experts who have an opinion on something, and anticipate counter objections. And often, this is one of the reasons I think that research is such a good thing, is that often it can change people's ideas based on the authority. So I've had a lot of students who come to me, and there's one in particular who he really understood, I think, the point of the research assignment. And he wanted to write a paper on how climate change is not that big a deal and that people aren't causing it, and it's been that way for so many years. And I said, okay, now keep in mind, you need to cite academic journal sources. That means you're having to cite scientists who are expert in their fields in climate science specifically, who are talking about whether climate change is happening or not. I said, as long as you can, find research that supports what you're saying by climate scientists, then that's fine. And he said, okay. And so he went out and started doing, what is that for? Pardon me, I don't know what this is for. Oh, I see what it is. Okay, got it. That's fine. I apologize. That was something. I have to remember to do one more thing. Valentine's Day for my wife that I had forgotten, and I don't know why I made it for 10 in the morning. I must have meant it for some other time and accidentally put it. Anyways, that's irrelevant to you. But the student, he did his research, and he found that there were no scientists who were climate scientists who thought that climate change wasn't happening or wasn't a big deal. And he said, I don't really know how to approach this. He said, basically, all the climate scientists say that it's real and it's happening and it's a big deal, and we should stop doing things like we should start moving into what's the stuff, like renewable energy. And I was like, interesting how that happened. And he was like, I guess I'm gonna write the paper with the opposite thesis because the research has kind of changed my mind on it. And I was like, okay. See, a lot of people aren't willing to do that. They're like, well, I know that 99% of scientists agree, but I'm still not convinced. That's not necessarily the best way to approach anything. Now I can understand disagreements on abortion because abortion, the argument we have there is that we don't like the idea of abortion and think that that's a cruel way of ending a life. Those of us who think that a fetus is a human and not just a fetus that has rights and is a person. However, the other ones, they think, well, it's more important for the mothers. This is more of a moral disagreement. However, people who try to disagree with climate science on the grounds of science when they're scientists and you're not, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So a lot of times the research will show you facts that you weren't aware were the case. I've had similar things cropping up for those students who have been writing fracking papers too, saying fracking's fine, we should do more of it. They start doing the research, and there's less of it right now, but they're finding more and more that the scientists who are researching are finding that it is causing a number of significant problems. So the idea is when you do your research, you want to be able to lend authority to the argument by finding somebody who's actually an authority. I have the same problem with people who want to write the papers about how vaccines are bad because they cause autism. There are no scientists who say that. There are only people who have their own websites and former Playboy models who purport this. Jenny McCarthy, by the way, is the one who has been championing this whole thing. But you also can anticipate and counter objections using research. Lots of use for research, and you're always going to sound smarter if you're using experts in their fields to support the points that you're making. Anytime you have proof of what you're saying from somebody who knows what they're talking about, you're going to sound a lot better. It's just one of those things. Now, when you're using your sources to inform your argument, you will need to research to find support rather than just rely on your own mind to supply evidence. Now, that's just after this paper, so you can feel welcome to use it on cause effect, but you don't have to. Now, citing sources and avoiding plagiarism. And I'll be reading a lot of this verbatim for a reason. According to Hacker and Summers, the 8th edition, which is this book, your research paper represents your ideas in conversation with the ideas in your sources. To be fair and responsible, you must acknowledge your debt to the writers of those sources, and if you don't, you commit plagiarism, a serious academic offense, from page 400. So basically the reason for citing sources is to avoid plagiarism. You don't want to steal from others. Now, what is plagiarism? According to Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, 11th edition, to plagiarize is to commit literary theft, and that's quoted in this book, actually, on page 6. So I know it's a dictionary definition, but it's quoted in this book. It also involves presenting another person's ideas, information, expressions, or entire work as one's own. I'm sure you've had a nice idea before, and you can't stand when somebody has stolen it and said it's your own, or said it's their own, right? Usually that happens like at work, where you come up with a good idea and then somebody else hears you say it and they tell the boss it was their idea. That's not really fair. We don't like that. That's how a lot of China works right now, because I don't think that they have strict IP law in the way that we do, IP meaning intellectual property. I saw something online the other day that was a toy in China. It was Poke Wars. It was a Pokemon toy made up like Star Wars. Those don't actually exist. That's not something that Pokemon or Star Wars has licensed, but because it's in China, they can kind of do whatever they want. They can, I like this, I'll just make it myself. Because they don't really have strict intellectual property laws. So if you like an idea, you can make that toy. You're like, I want to make Pokemon toys. You can. As long as you're willing to shell out the money to make them, you can sell them. And sometimes I think people get caught, but it's not like this huge policing thing like we have set up here in the United States to catch people who are stealing from others. I think that there was a lawsuit over whether or not Blurred Lines, you know that song? Stole from...
Somebody was back in like the 70s.
Yeah, it was something like Fats Domino or Bob Marley, maybe. It was somebody from that area, from that time period. I can't remember who exactly it was, but they were saying they stole from that person. It was just like a small line of like the song.
Yeah, somebody that's passed away because it's their family. That's
right. But it was literally just a few notes of the song, but it did sound very similar. And I think that there was a lawsuit, like Vanilla Ice had that song many years ago, and they got sued by Queen. It was like the same song except for like one note. It was really weird. It was funny hearing them on TV saying, yeah, but his does this, but ours does this. It was like the same. Very weird. But you don't want to plagiarize. You don't want to take somebody's ideas and present them as your own, because that's not fair. Basically, anytime that you fail to cite quotations and borrowed ideas, So even just ideas you're borrowing from somebody. You're like, oh, I think that guy's right. I'll cite that in my paper. Or like, I'm going to use that in my paper. But you have to cite it if it's somebody else's idea. Anytime you fail to enclose borrowed language in quotation marks, so like if you use somebody's exact language from their thing, you have to put that in quotes and cite that directly. Or anytime you summarize someone else's ideas in your own words without citing those ideas, you're plagiarizing. So it's not just if you're quoting something directly, but also if you're, like, you can be exact quotes is bad, but also if you're like, well, I'll just put this in my own words. That's also not okay. I mean, I don't know if you remember for like, did y'all have to do this in school, like when you're in elementary school where you're like, got like an encyclopedia or something, and the teacher said, like, all right, put it in your own words. Technically speaking, you as like a second grader sitting there putting like what was there in your own words so you weren't copying it. You were technically supposed to cite that and say, source, Gale Encyclopedia. I think they're actually making kids do that now, since research is becoming more and more important, I think, at the school level. Now, I did modify that third one to reflect my rule on the matter, but that does still come from the book. And now, what is wrong with plagiarism? Well, we've already kind of talked about it, but what's technically wrong with it? Plagiarism is thus a kind of fraud, deceiving others to gain something of value. While plagiarism only sometimes has legal repercussions, for example, when it involves copyright infringement, violating an author's exclusive legal rights publication, it is always a serious moral and ethical offense. I don't know why you see a lot of this happening on like YouTube. People get really pissed off. Y'all seen like somebody who does like a YouTube channel, and then they post that somebody else stole their YouTube content and put it on their more popular channel? That happens a lot these days. And like, it's not okay. Like, they're basically calling out plagiarism, saying this person stole my stuff and said it's theirs. That's not fair. So that's essentially what's wrong with it. It's stealing, it's fraud, it's saying you're something that you're not. And now, what does it mean to cite sources? To cite is to quote by way of example, authority, or proof. That's from the dictionary definition of cite that I looked up directly. You must cite anything you borrow from a source, including direct quotations, statistics, other specific facts, visuals such as cartoons, graphs, diagrams, any ideas you present in summary or paraphrase. And that's according to Hacker and Summers, but not this edition. It's actually the 7th edition of this book on page 377. This one here is the 8th. So I'm sure you've noticed how I've been putting weird stuff after every single quote or idea that I have in the last few slides, and that's how you cite. Any idea that you're referencing, that you're taking from another source, you have to cite in this way. And that's why I've been deliberately taking so many so I can give you some examples. There's a basic idea of this where this is how citation essentially works. The page number of the reference, as well as the author's name, or key phrase from the reference's title if there is no author. So sometimes you don't have an author, like with the MLA. You basically consider MLA the author, and sometimes you have an article with no author. And you just have to cite like a word from the title. You list that in parentheses. So you can see here, this book is by Hacker and Summers. I can see down here at the bottom, Hacker and Summers wrote it. So I'm citing Hacker and Summers, 377. Now I've put 7th edition because I'm having to distinguish between the 7th and the 8th editions, which I've cited both up here. That's the only way to do it because otherwise it's exactly the same. And notice every single time you see this, you'll see the end of a quote mark, start the parenthesis, author, page number, end of the parenthesis, and then period. So it always goes quote, parenthesis, period. Here you see I've already mentioned the author, which is the MLA. So I don't have to mention that author again, like I said here. If the author's name's already been mentioned outside the parentheses, repeating the name doesn't happen. So if I already said the name, I don't repeat it. So I just put the page number, so it's quote, parentheses, period. Here, quote, parentheses, period. Now notice this is a quote from the Webster's Collision Dictionary that I'm quoting from the MLA book. So it's got slightly different rules. Anytime you're doing stuff like that, this book will have how you approach those things. Let me see. This one right here, because I didn't mention the MLA recently in a way that I was sure that somebody would know I was talking about it, I put quote, parenthesis, author, page number, period. And it happens over and over again like this. Even if I don't have a quote mark, if I'm summarizing the ideas, I still go pretend like if there was a quote that'd be there. Essentially, it's just still the idea, then parentheses, author, page number, period. Quote, page number, period. That means I must have listed the author above, right? After and summary. See, as long as I'm saying the author and the page number, if I'm using a web source, sometimes I won't have a page number. So it might just be the author that I'm mentioning. I'm citing it. And that's the whole goal of this, is to be able to know exactly where I got the information. So if I actually look in this book on page, this is the goal. If I look in this book on page 400, then I should find that exact quote. And that's the whole point. You know, you should be able to follow an author's source of ideas. Let's see. Page 400 represents your ideas in conversation. Your research paper represents your ideas in conversation with the ideas and your sources. Be fair and responsible. You must acknowledge your debt to the writer of these sources. If you don't, you commit plagiarism, a serious academic offense, which is the exact quote from this book. So you should be able to take this PowerPoint presentation and use the books that you have, which you don't actually have this book. This is one that I cited, but you don't have. You should be able to use this book to at least find all the quotes from this book, so you can verify that what I was saying is really there. And that's kind of the whole goal, is that for places that cite their sources, it's easy to just follow what they're saying and see if what they're saying is legit. Now, this is a problem that I have with some of the stuff that's been happening in the news this last week and the weeks before, just from an English teacher standpoint, not really a politics standpoint, but I have a real problem with, it wouldn't matter if it was a Democrat or Republican office doing this, but the idea that there was the reason behind the immigration ban, which I understand if you want to have an immigration ban, there's got to be reasons behind that. That makes sense. But the immigration ban that had happened, one of the things that they were citing as the reason for that was the Bowling Green massacre, which never happened. And so they used a number of news sources and found that there was some guys, I think, that were expected of having tried something, but it never went through. There was no massacre. And I don't even think that those guys might have been natural born. I can't remember the details around it. All I know is that there was no Bowling Green massacre. You have to go look up the actual sources to find the full story there. But it was cited by the administration, like I think it was the press secretary and well, what's her name? Conway? I think that's her name. I'm really bad with names. But they were citing that as like the source for why the immigration ban has happened. I understand that there's something real that happened that is the reason why this immigration ban is in place, but cite that, not a fake thing that never happened that we can verify through outside sources. So that's the problem that I have from an English teacher's perspective, is all I do every semester is talk about how important it is to have things researched and be able to verify them, and to have people out there that are saying, oh, you can just make stuff up, that's fine. It pisses me off from an English perspective. But this is becoming even more important as time goes on, because we have so many people in the world, and we have the internet, and ideas can just be thrown out there willy-nilly all the time, and it's impossible to keep up with them all. So if you have well-researched sources, that's kind of like our bastion of hope in this society, is we've got, okay, someplace we can go where people have cited why they think what they think. They can trace it back to sources, and that's what we're looking for. So we need to strive to be like that as well. Here's an example, and I'll show you a little bit later what a works cited is, but this is like at the end of my PowerPoint, I have this slide. And any kind of paper that you have, where you'll have this kind of stuff throughout with like the parentheses and the quote and the period, the point is that is meant to direct you to the works cited that's at the end of the paper, which is kind of like a bibliography, but it's a list of all the sources that you use within that document. So these right here are referring within my document to the list of works at the end of my document. So that I can go to the end of the document and I can say, oh, okay, the MLA Handbook for Writers Research Paper 7th edition, I should be able to just type that into Amazon, typey, and look it up and buy a copy for myself, have it shipped to my house, then I can verify that what he said is true. And it's really there on those pages. And a lot of people aren't willing to go through that kind of effort, but there are people out there on the internet who are definitely willing to go through. I've got a copy of that book. Let me check and see if that's real. And that's one great thing about the internet is you can check people and if they're being truthful at all times. But you can see it's got some information that's included for every single one of these sources. You'll notice that sometimes I have a web address, sometimes I don't. That means this was on the web, that stuff was not. And I'll tell you like the different guidelines for a number of different simple sources that we're going to be using during the semester. Or not simple sources, but what I feel are going to be the most common types of sources you might use and some things that you would need to know. So essentially, most of the sources look kind of like this. You have like, well, I'll get to the details here in a minute. Now, when you're citing your sources, so you might have found some statistics that you want to use. You want to put those internally in your paper like that, the way that I did, and show that you're using them. You have to be careful when citing sources. It's very easy to just let the sources take over and you end up not writing much. You just end up saying what other people have said. And if that's the case, anytime you use an author's exact word, you're supposed to put the words in quotes. So in a situation that calls for it, it's fine to quote the exact words that the author says. So that's one way of citing, is put exact words in quotes. Like this. Now, if you decide not to quote exact words, and my suggestion is don't do that constantly. Find ways to put it in your own words or paraphrase. Then it's the same way as citing the other way. You just, for some reason, I didn't provide an example here. If you're just paraphrasing, it's something like, this, where these are mostly in the words of the book, but it's enough outside the wording of the book and used for a different purpose that you can tell I'm not directly quoting it. So I'm kind of summarizing these ideas here in my own way. And that's what you do. You just don't put it in quotes. You can still paraphrase and cite the idea, but you just don't put it in quotes. And I would actually prefer people do that more often than they quote directly, because it can be burdensome, as I'll be showing you in just a second. When you're integrating sources, you do need to limit your use of quotations. And I'm sort of showing you here that it's good to paraphrase. Don't quote excessively, because it's important that you're making the arguments and not just stringing a bunch of quotes together. And that's an idea that the old edition of the book kind of gets to, but I'm kind of putting it in my own words. And notice it's still just as though the quote mark were there. It goes quote mark, parenthesis, period. Idea, parenthesis, period. Author, page number in there. So just try to paraphrase as much as possible. If you can paraphrase, go ahead and paraphrase. If you really need those exact words, I guess you can use them. One way of keeping the quotations from taking over as well is using an ellipsis mark, which is a ... and it's meant to stand in for words you don't necessarily need that are from a larger quote. So earlier there was this quote, which had all this junk in the middle I don't need. So what I did was I got rid of the junk in the middle. So I said plagiarism is thus a kind of fraud, deceiving others to gain something of value, ... It is always a serious moral and ethical offense. So I really needed those two parts, but not necessarily that junk in the middle about legal repercussions. I just need to know that, hey, it's wrong. So that's what I included. So you can use an ellipsis mark and brackets to fix those things. Now the brackets are if you want to change a word to where it makes more sense grammatically or in the context and flow of your paper, but the actual word used is something different. You can notice that the real quote here, because I don't have brackets, says it is thus a kind of fraud, because plagiarism was already being talked about in the actual text. But I put plagiarism in brackets because I wanted to quote that sentence, but I didn't want to quote it as it. So I'm just changing out the word it for the word it's referring to, plagiarism. I'm sure you've seen this happen in news stories before, whether you were aware of it or not. Like, let's say they're interviewing Kanye West about that time when Kim, wasn't she robbed at gunpoint or something in like Europe, I think. They're interviewing, let's say, Kanye West about it, and he's constantly referring her to like pet names like Pookie and Boo, and like never says Kim. You know, she's like, do you feel safe? Do you feel like Kim is okay? Well, Bubble Butt's fine. It's just, you know, I'm just worried about her safety. But they can't put Bubble Butt in an article. They can't do that. So they're going to have to change out Pookie and Boo and Bubble Butt for Kim every time, or just Kim Kardashian if they want to be even clearer. So you'll see that appear in brackets to show that Kanye said something else, but still, the nature of what was said was that it was referring to Kim Kardashian, so they've switched out Kim Kardashian for whatever that pet name was that he was using in conversation. Or even like they want to use a sentence where all he said was she was so scared, and they might switch it out to Kim was so scared or something like that. If you have a really long quotation, you're supposed to make that clear to the reader, because it's hard for a reader to remember, wait, was this a quote that started a while ago? You know, because if it's really long, it's hard to keep up with that. Remember that as a reader that it's continued. So what you do is you're writing in double space the whole time like you should be, and then you tab over and go into single space while you're doing a long quote. And then because it's so obviously already different, you don't have to use the quote marks anymore, and you make it look kind of like it does normally. You just end it with a period, but then you put the page number after. So it's the only time when you kind of go outside the established norm, as when you're doing a really long quote. So if you happen to go, I'm doing a really long quote, how do I do that? Just look it up here in the little book if you forget, or you can look it up on my slide. Another way to make the sources not basically take over for you and still sound like you're writing the paper is on this book, in this book on page 406, there's a little box of different types of words you can use whenever you're introducing a quotation. And it's got a number of different types of words you can use to refer to something that's being quoted. Because what happens is often, constantly, students will say something like, Johnson says, Smith says, Thomas says, and it's just all says. But instead you can say, like, Johnson acknowledges, whereas Thomas contends. However, quickly after, Smith illustrates, so you're using different words to refer to says that are more specific and keep it from getting boring and monotonous. So there's some options for you. Basically, anytime you use a source, the idea is to let them know why the source is being used and not just throw a quote on there like you're making a collage in art class in like second grade. Did y'all ever make those? It was like, for me, it was art collages where like you had a block of wood or like a circular cutout from a tree, like a craft store, and the teacher would say, all right, go out and get like pine cones and leaves and glue them to this thing, and it's a nature collage. And so I'm not actually doing anything. I'm going and finding things that are already out there and gluing them to my stuff. And I think my other students told me that we did something like that, but with magazine clippings, where like you'd clip a bunch of magazine pictures and like titles and words and stuff to like a sheet, and then like, oh, look, it's a mosaic of magazine art. And y'all probably did something like that before, where like you didn't really do anything other than arrange stuff that other people had done. And you don't want to make your essay like that, where you're just arranging things other people have done without providing any critical thinking or explanation on your own. So you need to introduce them anytime that they're going to appear. Now, documenting sources, how to document them. I'm going to start with the works cited page, because that's where your internal citations will come from originally. So you'll need to know what those sources look like. So here's what a page of like a 10-page paper's list of sources would look like. You're not going to have to write a 10-page paper. You'll have to cite 2 sources for essay 3 and 5 for the research paper. The most you'll cite is 7 over the course of the semester, and only 5 at a time. But this 10-page paper has a whole bunch of different types of sources used. First one up there is a newspaper, then we have an online movie review, then there's an academic journal in print, then we have a movie, then we have a published book, academic journal in print, another academic journal in print. This is an academic journal, I believe found digitally online, but not in a database, written by the same guy who wrote the previous source. Website online, that's a newspaper website. Newspaper found in a database, and a published book. So I can tell what all those are just by looking at them, but not everybody will be. But there's different ways of citing each one of those you can find in this book. MLA has this thing they've come up with, and the reason this book used to be about twice as thick. Now it's only this big because MLA said, hey, let's just simplify this to this thing called containers, and now everything makes sense. So they think it kind of helps simplify things, and this sort of does, but at the same time, what they're essentially saying is for any source you have, you want to cite the author, title of the source, the title of the container that it's in, any other contributors that were there, like editors, version number, the number, publisher, publication date, and location. If you have those pieces of information for a source, you're supposed to include all of them. And when it talks about containers, if you get something out of a database, that's technically a container because you found a newspaper article, but it's in a database. So that's its container. Now, if I find an article that's published in a book, that book was housed on a database, then that's like 2 containers. So I've got to cite the information for both. So just essentially keep in mind that if you have something that's cited within something else, or something that's found within something else, you have to cite all the information for all of the things that's found between. And I'll show you on the next few slides. That's the very basic idea. My suggestion here is not to handwrite any of what you're going to see on the next few slides. These are the 6 most common types of citations or sources I think you're going to use when doing your citations for your papers. Does anybody know I might not want you to write something like this by hand? So maybe guesses.
It's really easy to miss a period or not.
Yes, completely and totally easy to screw up because you're handwriting how to write down these sources, and it's going to take a long time to handwrite each one of these things. You got to make sure the period's in the right place, the commas are in the right place, the italicizing is done correctly, and it's going to be very hard to kind of keep up with handwriting. My suggestion, one of 2 things. I'm going to post this, or I believe it's already posted on Blackboard, this PowerPoint in the PowerPoint section. So you can download the PowerPoints there, but if you know you're not going to be able to get on the download, PowerPoint link, then my suggestion is to, as each one of these slides come up, just pull your cell phone out and take a picture of each one. That would be my suggestion. Because when people are trying to do, I've noticed when people write down by hand the way the formatting works for these citations, and then later they're trying to do their citations for me on the assignment, like something like, I can't verify this because I don't know exactly how many people do the handwriting stuff, but like 80% of people I would assume make mistakes because it goes by so quickly and there's no way to keep up with it. And you have to how do you handwrite italicizing? It's kind of a weird one. And I've noticed too when I ask students what's the difference between this citation and this citation, which one's right, which one's wrong, and they don't really know offhand. So to you, all this stuff is kind of new. So yeah, it's difficult to keep up with what's correct, what's not correct. Am I writing this correctly? Did I write it correctly after I've written it? And it's difficult to pay attention to the details of something that you're very, very new to. Book is probably the easiest type, which I don't think many people are going to be using books. It's not very common. People are going and buying books to cite for research on these papers. So that's why I had it really down low. And also you can see that on this, if you're taking pictures, it's the 30th source type within this. So it's going to be in this book, and it's the 30th source type on page 439. That might actually be easier to write down than the source itself. The second type, article in a journal. And this is actually a print version of a journal. An academic journal is a good source because essentially what it is it's a number of experts in their fields who work on the editorial board of that journal, and people submit articles for publication in that journal. So let's say that somebody wants to submit an article on climate science, or whether or not gun control laws work in a particular city. And so what they do is they submit it to this journal of publication. You submit it to a climate science journal in one case, I don't know, gun control science journal in another case. I don't really know much about the other one, so I'm just going to stop talking about it. It's like a climate science journal. And you'll have 6-7 climate scientists on the board of this journal, and they all will read all the articles that are sent to them. And if they find discrepancies or problems in their research, they say, well, the methodology here wasn't actually good. You made a mistake here. The math's not right here. Then they won't publish that. And if they notice that it's inconsistent with other research, they'll really look into it heavily, making sure that what they've said is actually true. But you've got experts reading it. It's not like You know, if you want to publish something in a book, all their concern is, will it make money? If it's going to make money, we'll publish it. Sometimes even if it's false. But academic journals, they're all about making research in that particular fields more in-depth and more accurate. These are people who dedicate their entire lives to that particular field. So they're going to publish better work in general because there are, I guess, expert peers reviewing it. And so you'll see it's got a lot more information because a periodical, these things comes out periodically, like maybe once a month, once a quarter. So it has different information you need to know. So it's got authors, the title of the article, and it's kind of just like this other one, the book, authors, title, publisher, year. It's got more info. Authors, the title of the article, the title of the journal that it's published in, what volume number that is, and that essentially means like what year it's in, which issue number of that year, what date it was published, and what pages it's on. So you can see here I've got Ricardo Campo wrote Workers in Automata, a Sociological Analysis of the Italian Case, in the Journal of Evolution and Technology. Probably the 24th year they've been publishing it, the first issue of that year in 2014, pages 70 to 85. And so I can tell all that from just looking at the source based on its academic journal status. Now the third most common type I think you would use, and these are, by the way, in reverse order. So I think this is actually the third least common type you'll use, not the third most common type. Because I can't see people going and using books for every single source. This is just citing a website. It doesn't mean it's the one I think is the third most credible. It just means the one I think would be most common to use. In fact, in a number of cases, I'll get a lot of people to try to do their first citing on this essay too, and they'll cite a bunch of websites, and I'll say, well, this isn't credible for this reason, or this one's not credible for this reason. And they'll go, oh, I didn't realize that wouldn't be credible. But still, I'll not be that hard on this time. So you have most of the same information. We have authors, then the title, just like usual. Then we have the sponsor of the site, which is sort of the same as like the publisher, like for the book. And we have the date that it was updated, URL. So there's different considerations for where something is published as to what information we need to include. So I have Stephen Railton wrote Mark Twain and His Times. Now there's something that kind of gives me cause for concern here, and that's that this site is published by Stephen Railton. So, I mean, he's part of the sponsor. He's the one who's made his own website and put information on it. However, it's also under the guise of University of Virginia library. So they're at least willing to allow that name to be put on it. The fact that it's associated with the University of Virginia library. So that's a little bit better than just it's his name. And that's published in 2012 at twain.live.virginia.edu. And it's probably got a much longer address than that, but you generally just put where it can be found rather than like a huge long address. It's ugly. Depending on how long it is. If it's many, many lines long, don't include it. But if it's something just short enough where we could probably be okay with it, you can. Like I'll show you here. So an article in a newspaper from the web, which is the third most common source I think you will use. It usually has the authors, the title of the article, the title of the site, the date, and the URL. So you can see Ben Rosen wrote, $15 minimum wage will lead to robots, says McDonald's ex-CEO, will it? And that comes from the Christian Science Monitor on the 26th of May, 2016. And then there's the URL, which is short enough that it's not that bad, I think. So I let it be included that way. And by the way, minimum wage is one of those things that, like, it's one of those things that we do need a minimum wage. But the problem is, if you raise it too high, it has just some repercussions. Like you can see, McDonald's has announced that if the minimum wage goes up in an area of $15, they're going to replace all the workers with machines that make the burgers. So they've actually already got some pilot programs in states that are trying to pass $15 minimum wage. So if we ever go that high, they're going to start. It depends. Like once we become too expensive, they're not going to pay us anymore. So minimum wage, great idea. Just doesn't always work depending on how high it goes. Which is problematic and sad, but a reality. Fifth type, so second most common, would be an article in a newspaper from a database, because I'll ask you to use the databases when you find articles as often as possible. The same information you'll see from the other one, but it's author's title of article. Now it's titled newspaper with date and pages if they're available. Sometimes they'll be available since they're basically the version that it wasn't print but online. Then you'll have whatever label is necessary if they've got that, if it's an editorial or feature. Then you have the title of the database it's from and the database URL. So you see it's the same information we had before, almost to the letter, with the exception that at the end it ends with opposing viewpoints and context and this very simple database address. Which generally is just you take the front of the web address that's there and you use that, which I'll show you what that is. And then this is probably the most common source type you'll use because you'll have to use 5 of these for your research paper. So that's why you're going to be using it the most. You'll have the same stuff that it was for a print journal: authors, title of article, title of journal, volume number, date, pages. And now you just add the database info. So you'll have a database name. Then you'll have a DOI number, which is a digital object identifier. And if they don't have that, you'll use whatever that database's version of that is, whether it's an access number or a document number, just some identifier that shows on that database a specific code for that article, where if you go to that database, type that code in, it'll take you directly to that article. What I mean here is this particular article did not have a DOI number on this particular database, so it didn't exist. However, this one did. It has a DOI number right here that it provided, and that should always take me, if I go to that database, it should always take me directly to that article just by typing in that number. But it's the same journal that I cited earlier, print, and so you can see all the way to here it's the same, but I found it on the Academic Search Complete database at this web address with this digital object identifier. So you can see, like, sometimes you're just merging different types, and that's how it works. But that's the 6th most. That's probably the most common type you'll use. Hopefully you saw some patterns. It's basically the same information used over and over again. So as long as you get down to the basics of that, you can cite almost anything. And you've always got this reference source to use with it, so that's good as well. You won't have to memorize all that stuff. There's that works cited page again. It's got some of the common stuff, and then in-text citations. So when I say in-text citations, this is actually the stuff within your paper that will refer to that works cited page. All those things I was just showing you are works cited entries. So those are what's going to go on the last page of whatever paper that's using research. This stuff is what goes in the paper that refers to that works cited page. Note I've said it always has the author, the page number have to be cited within a source. So here I'm doing it again, author and page number, but I didn't mention the author previously, author and page number where I did mention the author previously, just like you saw earlier in the PowerPoint, and it tells you how to do that in this book as well. The only difference is a long quote where that's just slightly different, but you saw that earlier as well. The basic idea here is that you will have to use research on your upcoming papers. Not necessarily this one, you can if you want. And you will, when you do that, have to cite whatever resources you've used in order to have a trail of your ideas be able to be easily followed by those who are reading your work. My suggestion to you, my very strong suggestion, is do not try to write the works cited entries for all of your sources right before you turn in your paper. It's much easier to do it as you go along, because probably the first 2 years out of college, I would gather the research. I would try to write a paper, then I would later try to add research to it, and that's a terrible idea. It's just a horrible idea. I don't have time to explain why today, but I'll explain why next time. So remind me, and I'll start with this slide. I'll probably actually go over this real quick before the peer review of the paper, because I think that's something I want to keep fresh on people's minds, why that's a bad idea. Y'all have a good one. Recording.